I think there's no better way to fully appreciate Avengers Infinity War than the way I did it. I watched Justice League like the week before, and I gotta tell you, there couldn't be a greater contrast between the right way to do a superhero mashup film and the wrong way to do that. I'm gonna change the shirt, it's bothering me. I was very surprised that I didn't get this movie spoiled to hell for me, especially because this is a film that's going to shake up the status quo in the Marvel universe. So we all knew going in, some people are going to die, something like a lot of things that we have become accustomed in the MCU are no longer going to be. So I expected for this movie to be spoiled for me for one specific reason. These Disney films, they tend to come out in Brazil a week before they come out in North America, or at least they always have been. Like Star Wars, all the superhero movies, all of these films come out in Brazil before they come out here. And there's a lot of assholes on the internet, so a lot of them rush to my Twitter or they email me, they comment on my website, they try to spoil these movies for me just because why not? So I was really surprised that wasn't the case, and I only recently found out that that's because it only came out in Brazil a day before it came out here in Canada. So I guess I'm glad. I never quite understood why they come out in Brazil, or used to, at least up until recently, came out in Brazil a week earlier. I always thought that that was a piracy curbing effort. Like these emerging markets, you get a lot more of like people bringing cameras into the theater. This is a very common in Russia too for some reason, and I guess in Brazil as well. So back in the day, I remember this started when these movies were being released by Paramount. Like the first Iron Man movie was distributed by Paramount, and I believe that was the movie that started this whole thing of putting the movies out in Brazil a week before in North America. So back then it was impossible to go to a movie theater without knowing anything about the flick. Very happy with the decision to not put the movie out in Brazil a week before. Anyway, one thing about Avengers Infinity War is that it's a more serious movie than the previous ones, because as you know, Thanos, the big bad guy who's been orchestrating some of the events that happen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, has finally come to Earth to get all the Infinity Stones he needs for his gauntlet to become super powerful, essentially. So because this is a film that's going to change a lot of things about the MCU, you know it's going to be a darker, a more emotional film in this franchise, and Marvel has always struck a good balance between comedy, and there's a lot of comedy in these films. I remember Avengers was really the big standout. It was the one that really started this trend of leaning heavily into comedic moments. I remember being very surprised in the theater in 2012 when I saw all the little jokes and quips, and then that has now been the staple of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So for this one, it's a tougher balancing act, because you know a bunch of characters are going to die, you know a lot of things are going to change, there's going to be some emotional moments between a lot of these characters, a lot of different areas in this film where there's going to be like emotional centerpieces, right? So I was curious how they would be able to pull that off and still do the whole quippy thing, the jokes here and there. So I wonder, like, they could go one of two ways. They could try to do what they've always done and see if that formula still works in a movie that's supposed to be more serious with higher emotional stakes, or they could just go dark and gritty all the way throughout, which would be a weird tonal shift, and I think a lot of fans wouldn't appreciate that as much. I'm glad to see that they went with the first option. They try to balance these two, and it worked far better than I thought it would. For some reason, maybe because I just gotten accustomed to the Marvel formula, the jokes, the constant joking, didn't bother me as much as it did some other internet reviewers, so who knows. I will say, some of the dramatic moments felt uneven, because some of the characters who die in this film are characters that we haven't really gotten accustomed to yet. We saw them in a couple of movies at most. The majority of the big players didn't die. I guess now I have to put it in the I have to put in the title now that there are some spoilers, but I'm not going to tell you who dies, because I guess we don't have to get into that in this video. But suffice to say, some of the people who died, I felt like you just came into this universe, so I didn't really grown accustomed to yet for this to have the emotional weight that obviously they were going for. And make no mistake, the final scene where a lot of these characters die is pretty heavy. It's like, it's an intense emotional moment that one wouldn't expect out of a superhero movie, but still, to me at least, I felt like it was slightly unearned, only because some of these characters are late to the MCU party. So I barely got to know them. Now about Thanos' motivation. So in the original comic, the reason Thanos wants to kill half of the universe is because he's courting Death. And yes, Death herself. Death is an entity in the Marvel universe in the comic books, and Thanos is in love with Death, and Death doesn't really care that much about Thanos, so he's like, I got it, I'm gonna kill half of the universe, and then she's gonna love me. Which, at the outset, even as he's making this plan and talking, he's talking to Mephisto, which, where is it here? Did I lose it? How could I have lost it? These things never leave my house. I forgot I had Marvel Zombies 2. Where the fuck is One More Day? I mean, I hate the comic, but I still want to have it. I bought it. Seriously. The fuck is this? Thanos is discussing his plan to court Death by killing half of the universe with Mephisto, who is the infamous demon in the even more infamous storyline, I forgot the name! One More Day, where Spidey makes a literal deal with the devil in order to save Aunt May, right? So it's this is one of the worst Spider-Man storylines, if you ask any fan. Anyway, it was kind of cool to see Mephisto there, because I completely forgot Mephisto was in that story. Anyway, was that worth it to stop the whole thing? Just to get this? Anyway, my point is that in the comics, he wants to kill people just because he thinks Death is gonna appreciate that gift. Whereas in the movie, Thanos is more like, I want to kill half of the universe because there aren't enough resources or whatever, so life is going to be better for the people who are left standing, sort of. Which I suppose kind of mirrors how these things happen in the real world. When people do awful things, almost always, they think they're doing it for a good cause. They think that things are going to be better if this is done. I think, like, outside of serial killers, nobody does evil stuff just for the sake of being evil. There's always a motivation. They're always convinced that this is for the better somehow. So I get it. It makes sense. Especially because they couldn't do the original motivation from the comics because death isn't a thing in the Marvel universe. And yes, they've introduced a lot of really weird concepts into this universe. It's actually pretty amazing they're able to pull these things off. If you watch the first Iron Man and you think, you know, one day there's going to be a walking tree, a talking raccoon, aliens from outer space, there's going to be a wizard in here. None of those things seem like they would make sense in this universe about a billionaire who built a suit of armor. But it's pretty amazing that it all meshes together in a very entertaining way. It doesn't just work, it works really well. But at the same time, here's the problem with Thanos' motivation. So he gets this golden glove made out of, well, magical space rocks, which allows him to reshape reality. So if his ultimate goal is to improve the lives of people all over the universe, he could just as easily snap his fingers and just improve the conditions without needing to kill them, right? Turn planets into these luscious paradises with like plenty of resources and space and food and whatever. So it's a little inconsistent. In the comics, he needs to kill these people because he's trying to date Death herself. It makes more sense. It's more evil, and it wouldn't work in the film because no death. But there's that, right? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like, why couldn't Gamora just be like, yo, why don't you just make, like, so there's food and money for everybody? There you go. Like, you don't have to kill these people. The argument could be said that Thanos is literally mad. He's the Mad Titan, or at least he's called that in the comics. Not sure if it works to use that justification in the film, where that hasn't been established. Anyway, okay. The most boring part of the film for me was the obligatory fight with a bunch of faceless grunts. And I guess it works as well as these things tend to, and I would look for it here, but screw that because it took me long enough to find this thing. That scene was very reminiscent of a New Avengers, was it New Avengers or was it Mighty Avengers arc called the Venom Bomb, where basically somebody deployed a symbiote, and yes, symbiote, not symbiote. Sony, what the fuck? Symbiote? Man, that Venom movie is gonna be horrible. They can't even get the name right. Anyway, it reminded me of that Venom Bomb arc where somebody deployed a literal Venom Bomb in the middle of New York, and then the Mighty Avengers had to fight a whole bunch of New Yorkers who had transformed into a bunch of Venoms. For some reason, the design of those aliens that are fighting in Wakanda reminded me of that story arc. It's kind of boring. It's kind of predictable. Like, that's the problem with these superhero mashup films, right? They always need a bunch of these faceless grunts that really pose no threat to the heroes because it's just the way that these films have to play out. Of course, the standout from this trend was Civil War, because the heroes are fighting each other, which I don't have it here either. Ah, for fuck's sake. I bought all these comics, right, to flex my nerd cred, and then when the time comes to actually show them on the camera, I don't have them here. Whatever. Civil War. That was the idea, to have a bunch of heroes fighting each other, and that's nothing new. We've had that in a lot of different comics in the past, but Civil War is the one that made it to theaters. So I forgot where I was going with that. I like that Marvel isn't afraid to change the status quo. A lot of things going forward are going to change because of this film, in like both in universe and out. A lot of these actors, their contracts, their commitment with Marvel has since run out. So they are ready to exit stage. I mean, they've been making these films for some of them, like Robert Downey Jr., for 10 years now. So it makes sense to pass the baton to the next Avengers. They're not going to end this universe because it's printing money, essentially. But these characters, it's time for them to retire. So, of course, they're going to use this movie as an excuse to get rid of a bunch of these people. And though in the past I've said that I'm kind of burned out on superhero movies, I've seen so many of them. I've seen so, like, I get it at this point, especially with the Marvel formula where you have this guy and he's kind of quippy, he's kind of funny, he's kind of sarcastic, and then he thinks too highly of himself, and then something bad happens, and then it's the literal hero's journey, right? There's a reason it's called that, because, and I can't fault Marvel too much for relying on these tropes, on this story arc, because it's something that people have been using to tell stories for so long. It's not like they're going to reinvent the wheel, but at one point you've seen what I call the Iron Man plots too often, right? And especially with the Marvel movies. Like, if you really think about it, for instance, Doctor Strange and Iron Man are effectively the same movie. You have a super rich guy who's really cocky, and then he gets into an accident and he has to kind of like work his way out of that, and then in that he finds out there's this larger universe, and he ends up having to fight somebody who's kind of like a mirror image of himself in a way. That's the problem with Marvel, right? A lot of their movies boil down to the hero is fighting the evil version of himself. So with Iron Man, you had Ironmonger, and then in the second one you had Whiplash. With Doctor Strange, he's a wizard, so he's fighting an evil wizard. With Black Panther, he's essentially fighting evil Black Panther. It gets repetitive. So even though I felt like I've had my fill with these stories, I'm excited to see what the MCU will be past the usual suspects, past Captain America, past Iron Man, like seeing who the new Avengers will be, because that's the thing we see in the comics a lot, right? Like the Avengers lineup, it changed almost immediately after they were formed, and it makes sense to see this revolving roster of characters in that team. One little detail I liked is that, as you remember from the previous Thor film, his hammer was broken in Thor Ragnarok. So there's a plot point in this movie where he needs a new hammer, which I think is a step back, because Thor Ragnarok established that, hey, you know what? You don't actually need that hammer. They even say, I forget what character says this, but they ask Thor, like, are you the god of thunder or the god of hammers? Right? And it's a moment for the character when he realizes that, hey, I don't even need that thing, and he becomes even more powerful for it. It's an interesting arc, but of course, Thor and his hammer is such an iconic coupling. I guess I should have known they would eventually go back to it, and I was very happy about the way they did that. They gave Thor his ultimate, I'm not sure if you're going to see it here, but you see his hammer here looks different from what it looked in the movie so far. It's kind of like a half hammer, half axe. And it's funny because when the movie started going in that direction, like, oh, he needs a new hammer, I started elbowing my girlfriend like crazy, like, oh, they're going to go with the ultimate hammer. And she never read these comics, so I doubt she even knew what I was talking about. So when I saw that happen, I was like, yes! The ultimate hammer, I love it. It makes a lot of sense considering the first Avengers movie was basically like, they took a lot of inspiration from the Ultimates, so it was great to see that. Box office wise, as everybody expected, this thing was a major smash hit. As of right now, they earned $725 million in the box office, which I even think it's not that much when you think about it. It's, you know, the final Avengers film. And then I realized that it's because it didn't open in China yet. It doesn't open in China until May 11th, and China is a massive market for these films. So it'll easily, I'm gonna say it's gonna easily cross 2 billion once it opens there. So there's that. As of right now, the biggest film of the year is still Black Panther with $1.3 billion made in the box office. So that's pretty massive. But I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination to say that the Avengers Infinity War is definitely going to surpass that. So that's overall what I thought of the film. I know this was a little bit rambly. I didn't really script this video. I was just going off on things I remember from the flick. I thought it was a great movie. It was entertaining. The jokes didn't bother me as much as it bothered some other people I saw on YouTube. I think it had a good balance, even though, like, you know, it's funny because they really find a very fine line. It'd be easy to screw this up, for the tonal shift to not work, for the dramatic scenes followed up by jokes to completely ruin both, right? Like, it would be at the detriment of both. The dramatic scenes would be undermined by the comedy, and the comedy wouldn't be so funny because you just saw characters dying like 2 seconds ago. But Marvel, I want to say, did it again. It's a great flick. Go see it. You have to see it on the biggest screen you can. And that's it. Let me know, did you like this film? Are you just bored with it? Did you just go see this because you're going through the motions? You saw so many other Marvel films that at this point you just have to see how it ends? Or were you super excited for this? As always, let me know in the comments below. If you're new here, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, because YouTube sucks at letting you know I put out new content here on this channel. And that's all the time I have for today. I'm Izzy, and I'm done.